Gautam?
Yes.
Yeah, start.
Start ಮಾಡದಾ?
Varun is went out. He will be busy. Maybe some other coordinator.
Okay, you are the coordinator ಹಂಗಾದ್ರೆ.
Darshan ಬಂದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. Today are Deb, no? Deb and call chase.
Yeah.
With this call chase, except that call code trial, any some other thing is there?
That I think we will find out today.
Except that we have not heard that thing, no?
ಇಲ್ಲ ನಂಗೂ ಅದೊಂದೇ ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲ.
ಏನಪ್ಪ ಗೌತಮ್?
ಏನಪ್ಪ ಮಾಡಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ಮಾಡಿ ಮುಗಿಸ್ಬಿಡ್ತೀನಿ.
In our this thing bio some absorbable scaffolds was given to someone.
ಅರುಣ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾನೆ.
ಅರುಣ್ ಕೊರೋನರಿ ಸ್ಪೆಷಲಿಸ್ಟ್. ಅವನ ಒನ್ ಇಯರ್ ಮುಂಚೆನೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ಮಾಡ್ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾನೆ ಅವನೆಲ್ಲ ಆನ್ಸರ್ಸ್.
Find out that
preparation. Where is the second presenter for today, Gaurav?
Hello. What happened?
ಏನಪ್ಪ ಈಗ ಎದ್ದಿದ್ದೀ ನೀನು? 1 hour back we were talking about you. You woke up now.
Regarding what?
That you finished preparation last year.
No. I have not yet finished even now.
Now is revision. You are confused.
The preparation we are
that is true. That is true.
Huh?
That is true. Arun is completing revision now, not studying.
Hey, I'm reading aortic stenosis from that Alpert for the first time.
ಏನಪ್ಪ?
From Alpert, I am reading aortic stenosis for the first time today.
Hey, you are reading Alpert. I have not yet completed Braunwald also. You are
Braunwald you would have read.
Hey, there is so much changing in AS, man. No point reading book. Trust me.
Yeah, but for exam, these people will ask, no. Whether they ask the old things or new things, we don't know.
I don't know how far reading Alpert will be useful for our.
Hey, Arun is.
The Alpert, mainly those cath related thing and all that, even though I don't think all that is important, mainly this natural history and other things. Somebody who is interested to ask that, they may ask.
If they ask natural history, I am like hit wicket. Clean my stump.
They will ask specific questions, not just like open question like that. They may ask.
Anybody, any idea about natural history of ASD? Which book to study? I have seminar on that.
Presentation.
ASD.
ASD.
ASD you are telling.
So Venki, I am yet to search for hemodynamics of ESD, man.
Hey, I am also yet to search, man.
Venki, it is given nicely in Moss, man.
Moss,
Moss or Anderson, both they have given nicely on.
Moss and
Venki.
Perloff,
Anderson and Moss.
Natural history of VSD separately, one topic has been mentioned in that postgraduate.
Postgraduate essentials.
Yeah, but I don't know what ESD.
For
ASD. ASD is not there. ESD is separate chapter in that. I don't know why.
ASD is not there, Dimpu, in that essentials. But Moss has given very nicely 2 pages they have given.
Venki.
Hemodynamics of VSD.
Hey, madam. Hey, Sumnerappa. Hello.
Tell me, Gautam.
You madam told some freedom book. Someone was telling.
Yeah, I have that book. But that is very extensive.
Hey, the freedom book.
Freedom, natural and unnatural history of congenital heart disease. That one book is there.
Natural history very one book there.
Correct.
Madam asked we can have some classes. Prabhat madam asked the classes we can start and so
how classes appa?
Madam's classes.
Okay, but that's afterwards, no?
When afterwards?
After it starts, no? We are not supposed to. Oh, you mean online?
Online, I don't think so. Offline or offline, I don't know, because surgery people are anyhow doing classes there only. So I think sir, hello. I don't know. I'll just find out from when and.
Please don't ask for any more Zoom sessions. I have had it.
Okay, Gautam, you start. I think there are enough of us. Will come.
Okay.
You're talking. They've been both PAD and CAD, no?
But CAD I only like some 2 pages.
CAD, coronary artery disease.
Coronary are done, but peripheral artery disease not much.
Okay, good. Yeah.
I mean, anything. I mean, it has been asked. They've been peripheral artery disease.
Yeah, Deb is asked overall peripheral.
Deb was asked, so because it is. It goes hand in hand. I gave the topic like that, but they've been coronary artery disease was asked.
Yeah, that is okay.
They are given class with recommendation for ISR.
Okay, I'll start.
Yeah, Gautam, start.
Yeah, able to see, hello?
Yeah, clear.
Yeah, clear.
Okay. So we'll discuss about drug-coated balloons or drug-eluting balloons. So when we go back to the history, initially, I mean, it was balloon angioplasty for the treatment of coronary artery disease. But one of the major limitations of it was actually, after balloon angioplasty, there was elastic recoil and also dissection that used to lead to abrupt closure of the vessel. In order to overcome these 2 limitations, they started inventing the stents or to
Gautam, just speak into the mic, no?
1 minute.
This chapter written for Topal.
What?
He has written this chapter for Topal.
Why? There is a.
He has given the title, no Topal.
Hey, Arun,
Hello. Arun, nidde mado sumne. Hello.
Better.
Better, right? Okay. So okay. Thereby, next, in order to overcome those limitations, we got. They invented stents. So initially, it was bare metal stent. So again, the major limitation of these bare metal stents were there. One is acute thrombosis and also restenosis due to neointimal hyperplasia. So in order to overcome that, then came the drug-eluting stents, but still it had certain limitations like late stent thrombosis or restenosis. So with considering, with above limitations in mind, they invented drug-coated balloon or drug-eluting balloon. It was developed with the concept of combining the advantages of balloon angioplasty and also drug therapy of the DES in order to eliminate the stent thrombosis and also reduce restenosis by leaving basically no metal behind. So no metal or polymer behind, which are the major reasons for the late stent thrombosis or restenosis. So how these drug-coated balloons were developed? So basically, it was seen that direct contact of the anti-proliferative drugs with the vessel wall via a small non-compliant, semi-compliant balloon was sufficient enough to inhibit the proliferation of the smooth muscle cells for a period of like 1 month duration. And this 1 month duration is there when there is a extensive neointimal hyperplasia seen. So now, the drug, basically this drug was actually mixed with the carrier substance or carrier molecule, which is also called as excipient. And so this excipient on the drug-coated balloon facilitates drug retention on the balloon and also adhesion of the drug to the vessel wall and promotion of the drug deposition to the tissues. So it is basically a critical factor that enables the successful transfer of the drug to the vessel wall. So few of the examples of the excipient that are used are ipromate. It's a contrast agent, and it was one of the first agent to be used, and also shellac and polyethylene glycol. There are several others, but to mention 2 or 3, we can write this. And coming to the drug that is usually used is paclitaxel. And paclitaxel is actually preferred over sirolimus is basically because it is lipophilic in nature. So there will be more rapid and homogeneous uptake. And it is a irreversible inhibitor by inhibiting the microtubule formation, and is also cytotoxic. So basically, due to these advantages, it has got a rapid uptake and also prolonged inhibitions, favor the paclitaxel over the sirolimus. And usual dose that are used in the drug-coated balloons are usually 3 mics per millimeter square of the surface area of the balloon. So basically, I mean, these drugs are also delivered by various technologies. So 3 technologies that, if at all we can remember, is actually one is actually the Pacocath, which is the name of the drug-coated balloon, which is one of the earliest drug-coated balloons used. And it used actually Pacocath technology, in that basically the paclitaxel embedded in a hydrophilic ipromide coating. The another DCB, I mean drug-coated balloon, was actually DR. That also used paclitaxel coated on a microporous balloon surface and were folded. And the third was actually the Impact Empyrean, that used a pre-pack technology where a proprietary coating that balances the hydrophilic and also lipophilic properties. So what are the advantages of this drug-eluting balloon is? One is there is a homogeneous drug transfer. There is a rapid release of very high concentration of the drug, so minimal impact on the long-term healing process of the vessel. And basically there is no polymer, so there is no inflammation. And there is no stunt or metal, so preservation of the original coronary anatomy. This is more basically noticed where in the bifurcation regions and small vessel disease where the flow hemodynamics won't be altered much. And also over dependence on the DAPT can be reduced. So, but it has got certain limitations along with those advantages. One is, we all know that with balloon angioplasty, there is an elastic withdrawal, which even the same thing is also seen with drug-coated balloons. The second thing is actually the late negative remodeling of the artery, which is seen with plain balloon angioplasty, can also be might also be seen with drug-coated balloons, and it's not very clear, but it still could be seen is one of what they propose. So this is the table where table showing like various drug-coated balloons that are presently approved. So Pacocath is one of the initial drug-coated balloon, and DR and the Magic Touch are 2 drug-coated balloons are highlighted because these 2 were available in our cath labs, but presently only the Magic Touch balloon is available. I don't think DR is available now. And this Magic Touch is our Indian made, Gujarat, and that uses sirolimus nanoparticles.
We have
is a
Impact
sirolimus
also.
Impact also, huh?
Yeah, we have Impact for all peripheral. We use Impact only. Impact Admiral, it's called.
Okay. I asked Padmaja ma'am, she told only Magic Touch.
No, that is for coronary. Should have told.
Coronary.
For peripheral
Impact.
is Impact. Yeah.
So, okay, coming to uses of the DEB, one of the earliest use of the DEB was actually in instant restenosis. So the trial supporting these, its beneficial was in the Pacocath ISR1 and also Pacocath in ISR2 and PEPCAT2. basically all these trials showed that drug-coated balloons significantly decreased the late lumen loss at 6 months and also target lesion revascularization in 6 months and decreased the MACE at 6 months. So following these trials, ESC gave a class 1 recommendation for DCB in treatment of the ISR. So following these results, it was like people started to try use of the DEB in also de novo lesions. So there are like several trials showing use of DCB in de novo lesions, but there are some conflicting results. So the main approach used in all these studies are two approaches. One is combination therapy. The other is actually basically leave nothing behind strategy. So in combination therapy, what they did is actually in one arm they used drug-coated balloons and followed by a BMS or DES. And DES was used preferentially in patients with high risk for restenosis, like who were diabetic or diabetic patients. And in leave nothing behind strategy, DCB was performed and stent used only as a bailout for treatment of suboptimal results. That means like when some significant residual stenosis are present or when there is edge dissection or different, only in those cases they use stent or is just DCB was performed. So this is a table that's showing all those trials, but we need to remember only a few trials I have mentioned below. So in basically in the leave nothing behind strategy, it was basically compared drug-coated balloon versus drug-eluting stunts. So basket small 2 trial, restore and elevation. All these trials showed that drug-coated balloon was non-inferior to drug-eluting stunt. Of this, basket small was actually a large trial, and one more trial that is below. At 3 years, it also showed a drug-coated balloon to be superior to the drug-eluting stunts in terms of the major adverse cardiovascular events. But only one of the trial, that is Picolet trial, showed that drug-coated balloon was inferior to DES. But again, that has got many limitations. One of it was actually the balloon that was used in this Picolet was actually first generation Dyer balloons, which had many drawbacks. So they say because of those reasons that there was no benefit seen in Picolet trial. So with above result, it suggests that drug-coated balloons alone is non-inferior to DES in treatment of the small vessel CAD. Small vessel CAD, because in all this trial, what they did actually, the vessel which was addressed was all were like less than 2.5 centimeter. So in terms of the small vessel CAD, DCB was non-inferior to DES.
Gautam?
Huh?
That is 2.75, not 2.5.
Andre, yeah, certain trials has got like 2.75.
Yeah. See, basically the concept is that anything less than 3 mm, we call it a small vessel disease, or anything less than 2.75, which has undergone a procedure like a stent or a biovascular scaffold which is placed. So most of the trials have used less than 2.75 or 2 to 3, like in this, like you see that basket small, which is having a lot of, So 380 patients almost in each arm they had. So that was, they took 3 mm. So it is 3 as a cutoff. Less than 2, they called it as a very small disease. What they call here as small, which we say like literally less than 2 is small, no? So, but actually, by definition, it is very small.
Okay. So 2.75. Okay. Coming to the combination therapy. So what is the advantage of the combination therapy? It is that the drug delivery is by the drug-coated balloons, and then to overcome the mechanical complication, that is the elastic recoil or like abrupt closure due to dissection, they used a stunt. So the trials which evaluated these two, this combination therapy one was local tax. It has both arms, that is drug-coated balloon with BMS versus a BMS and DCB with BMS versus DS. And in that trial, it was told, it was seen that combination therapy was superior to in terms of plain BMS, but it was inferior when it was compared to the drug-eluting stents. Again, one more trial, that is DEB-AMI, in which actually drug-coated balloon plus BMS was tried in STEMI patients. Also, the result there also, it was like drug-coated balloon and BMS was inferior to the drug-eluting stents. Similarly, in PEPCAT-3 also, drug-coated balloon with pre-mounted BMS was tried against the DES, that is sirolimus eluting stent, and at 9 months, they saw that DCB arm had a higher late lumen loss and also higher maze.
Hey, Gautam, if you are using DEB, then after DEB, what is the point in putting the stent, like in the trial?
See, basically that's what, if you are using the DEB, no, there is a limitation of the DEB. That is, there can be elastic recoil, and also there can be some amount of late negative remodeling, they say. So they wanted to put a BMS, so that in BMS there is no polymer or polymer, which usually causes inflammation and late stent thrombosis and all this, late stent restenosis.
Okay.
So in order to overcome, they thought we'll do a DEB and put a BMS stent, so that there will be drug delivery also by DCB, and you got a metallic scaffold in the form of BMS.
Okay.
So, but it was tried, but it was only superior in terms, when it was compared to the BMS, but it was again inferior when it was compared to the DS. So, and they analyzed all these trials and found out why it was like inferior. And they, some of the drawbacks were actually the geographic miss. That is, they've done a DEB and they've implanted a stent, but they might have missed certain areas which have been dilated and not being covered by a stent. So geographical miss, and also variation in the vessel preparation. See, DEB is basically a balloon which are inflating to deliver the drug, and it is not meant to prepare the lesion. That if you have got a calcified lesion, or if you have got a tight stenosis, so before using the DEB, you have to prepare the lesion by various other techniques, like maybe a cutting balloon, or using atherectomy, or you using a high pressure non-compliant balloon. So you have to prepare the lesion first, then use a DEB. And also variation in the inflation time of the this DEB. See, in the trials, like, it again depends upon the excipient that you are using. Say, earlier studies in the animals, it has been seen that DEB being effective if you have inflated for 10 seconds also, and it is also effective when you are inflated for 60 seconds also. So again, it depends on the manufacturer and the excipient that is used. And basically, excipient that are used, it depends on this excipient also. So due to these variations, they say there was some difference in the results. So coming to the combination therapy, where DCB was and BMS was compared with the BMS, as I told you, in certain trials which compared this, as one is actual Pepsi in the STEMI, where post dilatation with the DCB after a BMS significantly decreased the late lumen loss at 1 year. And also in Impacto Coro and also Perfect, it showed that BMS and DCB was superior to BMS alone. So after these trials, they wanted to see the combination of the DCB and DES. So in patients with the diffuse coronary artery disease, use of a hybrid approach was evaluated. Now, hybrid in a sense, it basically consists of drug-eluting stent in the proximal region and a drug-coated balloon angioplasty to the distal lesion. That is, when you have got a coronary artery disease, very long segment coronary artery disease, you put a stent or a drug-eluting stent in the proximal segment and do a DEB in the distal segment. So that, because, sometimes what happens if it is a diffuse disease and the vessel is very narrow, like say 2.5 mm, 2 mm distal vessel, now putting a stent in that lesion may be impractical or maybe difficult thing. And it might lead to significant lumen loss also. So that's why you do a DEB in the distal lesion. So with that concept, they tried in few trials. So advantage of this was actually you're basically decreasing the stent length. You'll be decreasing the stent length that is used. So decrease in the stent or the polymer, so decrease in the restenosis rate. But they said that it should not be used to treat the same disease. You're doing a DEB and at the same time you're putting in the same segment a DES. That should not be done, what they proposed. And trial that is evaluating this concept is actually HYPER trial. I think the results are yet to come. So after these studies and results, what they have proposed now is actually...
This thing, the line which you told right now, that they said that there is no rationale of treating the same segment with the DEB and DCB. Sorry, DEB and DES. The same thing previously in that local tax also, they were doing this kind of thing only.
They did, yeah, they did. For this trial, they, when they're like when they gave the concept of using DEB and DES, they proposed this statement. Again, even I am not convinced with this statement, because most of the places they have used both and therefore to treat the same segment of the lesion. Now say when you have done a DEB and there is some dissection, they say that you have to put a stent, and that stent DES is preferred over the BMS stent, and they say at any time. So basically you'll doing a DEB and also you'll putting a DES stent also. But I don't know. I mean, it was given in that article saying this statement, but even I am not convinced with this.
Okay.
So for a successful DEB, what are the things we have to do is actually one is adequate lesion preparation. As I told, lesion preparation is important because DCB is not for lesion preparation. It is only meant to deliver the drug. So you do a lesion preparation using at a high pressure NC balloon. Hello. Using high pressure NC balloon, or using a scoring balloon, or some atherectomy devices like rota ablations or those things. Or you can, and using a DCB diameter to the vessel diameter in a ratio of 0.8:1 for a better drug delivery and apposition. And Baylor stenting only when there is suboptimal result. So that is type C dissection or more, or when there is more than 30% residual stenosis. In few of the trials, what they did is actually they put a stent when there was even type A, type B dissection, which they say actually hindered the positive effect of the DEB. The other thing is combination of DCB and BMS should be avoided, as we have seen in the previous trials. And in Baylor stenting, a current generation DES should always be preferred over the BMS. The same thing, Gaurav. This statement actually contradicts to what they said here actually. That's why you are not convinced with that. That is DEB in coronary artery disease. So when we come to,
not just for bailout stenting, see, when you're using DEB, when you're preparing the lesion, so the pre-DEB lesion preparation inflation also, they recommend NC of 0.8 to 0.9:1 to avoid, to minimize the chance of dissection. And like if you have anything less than TIMI3 flow, or if you have a type C or more dissection, or like you have seen there, as you written there, more than 30% residual stenosis. These three parameters, if they are there, then you should not go with you should not go ahead with actually DEB alone. So like even in small basket 2 and like other newer trials like PepCAD, NSTEMI, all these, basically all the randomized trials which they have done with DCB and DEB, I mean DCB and DES, they have actually randomized it after the lesion was pre-dilated.
Prepared.
Yeah, because it would be wrong to go ahead with only DCB and leave them if you have any of these three things, like type C or more dissection of 30% or more, or if you have a
suboptimal.
if you
less
have
than TIMI3 flow.
Less than TIMI3 flow. So all these three must be satisfied. So only then you should go ahead with the DCB strategy. Yeah. So and like bailout, and also like before preparation.
Okay.
So all these three criteria is after pre-dilating with NC. You have to see.
Yeah. Okay. Pre-dilating and lesion preparation. You can use even IVUS guided rota, like he's written there, and scalp angio, scalp scoring balloon, anything we can use. So, but after that, if all these three things are not there, then you can go ahead with DCB alone strategy. Otherwise, you have to stent. So, what stent you can choose? Like mostly, as we mostly would choose DES over this thing alone.
They say you have to use DES instead of BA.
All these DES is a semi-compliant balloon, no?
DES is compliant or a semi-compliant balloon? DEB, not DES.
No, yeah, semi-compliant. This one, DEB.
DEB is semi-compliant.
DEB is compliant to semi-compliant. Yeah.
So coming to DEB in peripheral artery disease, it is basically limited. Its use is limited basically to the femoral popliteal disease and also infrapopliteal disease. So coming to femoral popliteal disease, in sacroferofemoral artery and proximal popliteal artery are most common site of occlusion. And even now, surgical revascularization is the gold standard treatment for femoral popliteal disease. So what is the limitations of these endovascular therapies? Actually, one is elastic required in dissection with pain balloon angioplasty. And if you are going ahead with the stent, the problem is actually the stent compression and stent fracture, and also acute thrombosis, which actually leads to failure of the treatment. So meta-analysis shows stenting meta-analysis done with the stenting and PTA show that stenting not very superior to the balloon PTA. So with these results, they also tried DEB in femoropopliteal interventions. So few of the trials which are tried is actually Thunder trial, FEMPAC, Levante. So in this trial, it was seen that paclitaxel DEB versus plain balloon angioplasty, late lumen loss was significantly less in the DEB arm. Similarly, in FEMPAC also late lumen loss was significantly less in the DEB arm, and in Levante also it was seen. So, and when coming to infrapopliteal disease, the trials that evaluated was DEBELUM and DEBATE BTK. Both have shown that there was a significant decrease in the late lumen loss when, in the DEB1 when it was compared to standard plain balloon angioplasty. But recent trial, that is IMPACT DEEP, which evaluated DCB versus PTA for a long-term safety and effectiveness. At 5 years, there was no significant difference in terms of the major amputation or mortality, that is hard endpoints. So with the above trials and results, what the ESC latest 2017 peripheral vascular disease recommends is drug-eluting balloon may be considered, that is 2B indications for a short, that is less than 25 centimeter lesions, and it may also be considered, that is a 2B indications for instant restenosis. But for infrapopliteal disease, it is not preferred over PTA. It was based mainly on the IMPACT DEEP trial. So that's all.
Gautam, regarding CAD, recently there was actually one new trial which they had published in Circulation. It's basically PEPCAD series. All this PEPCAD is on CAD and this thing, no? So PEPCAD NSTEMI. So PEPCAD NSTEMI is basically that they have compared DCB versus BMS versus DES. Any strategy in NSTEMI, and they found that DCB was non-inferior to any BMS or DES. Another interesting thing they found in that study was that BMS and DES were comparable. Actually, one of the, they didn't find major differences between BMS and DES in the current generation, like current era when they have done that. It's called PEPCAD NSTEMI. And one more thing is this debut trial. No, debut trial I think was for high risk. I'm not sure if it was for bifurcation. It's a high risk bleed. So four major indications for DCB which they have tested in coronary artery disease in relation to coronary artery disease is one is ISR, and ISR's take home is that for a BMS ISR it is definitely to be used. It is superior to POBA alone, but for a DES ISR, whether or not it would be actually, it is currently not even non-inferior. Actually, it is inferior to DES with respect to TLR, target lesion devascularization, because in a patient with a DES ISR, like in a patient who's had a drug-eluting stents ISR, in them for the restenosis, if you do a DEB versus if you do another DES placement for the first time ISR, that is. So what they found is that if you do a DEB alone, you will have higher chance of target vessel devascularization as compared to using a DES at the end of 3 years. Okay, but there was a significant, there was no significant, but near significant decrease in MACE events with the DCB as compared to DES. But however, the point to remember is that for BMS ISR, it is considered superior to POBA alone or even DES placement. But for a DES ISR, it is actually a recommendation is that it is it is not yet proven superior, or it is not yet proven comparable also. With TLR is high with DCB if you do it for a DES ISR. That must be remembered. And one more thing is that, so for ISR, it is the first group. First group is ISR. Second group, which they have used it for, it is small vessel disease, which you have said. In small vessel, instead of trying nothing, doing a DEB will actually benefit. That is what they have found. And other group is high risk bleed. So what they have compared is with DCB versus BMS. They have given in debut trial, DEBUT. I think that debut trial. debut trial, what they have done is they have basically given DCB versus BMS, both 1 month antiplatelet, post DAPT in high risk bleeding, and they found that DCB was superior to this. This one.
Yeah.
No, there's one more. I think if I'm not wrong, there's one more actually. That is, this is not the one. This is debut. I'm talking about DEBUT. This is actually a recent trial, 2017 or 18. It is come. It's not this. It's not the Stella debut one. I'm talking about in high risk bleed. They have found that was a very well done trial, and they found that it actually it can be used in patients who have high risk bleed even in de novo disease. That is one. And this de novo coronary artery disease trials are what you said now, like the in small vessel disease, and this pepcad enstomy also can be added into one of them.
Okay,
pepcad enstomy was just like in the March or February, it has been published in circulation.
Okay.
And general recommendation post DCB is that you give 4 weeks of DAPT. After that, if it is ACS, you have to continue DAPT for 1 year, and if it is not ACS, you can stop.
4 weeks or 6 months?
It is 6 months, no?
4 weeks.
Revascularization only 6 months they have given.
No, but that is if you have had placed a stent like for an ISR.
For ISR only. For ISR they have given 6 months.
No. I am talking about only DCB. For a de novo.
DCB when used for ISR, they recommend 6 months, DAPT.
What I remember now is actually I checked in revascularization guidance only in the stable coronary artery disease they mentioned use of DCB can be done. If you are using DCB, then it is 6 months under there.
For a de novo, because the revascularization guidelines in 2018 doesn't talk about de novo CAD. I don't think so, because the de novo.
I also remember 6 months only. Somewhere this guidelines only I have read somewhere.
Hey, that is for an ISR. If you do a DCB for an ISR, no, if you are doing it for a de novo, you can stop after 4 weeks. You see the debut trial. Otherwise, the trial would have not been done only.
Hey, this one for DEB right now for ISR in European guidelines, they're recommending as class 1, no?
Yeah.
So they are not mentioning, that ISR should be BMS induced or secondary to BMS. They are not mentioning like that.
No, they say it can be either DES or BMS ISR actually.
That's what. So according to European guidelines, DEB is class 1 for ISR with D.
Correct.
With metallic or BMS or DES.
This one I was telling, like in this is basically stable coronary artery disease. Post intervention, stable coronary artery treated with DCB, DAPT should be considered for 6 months to be entered.
Yes.
Without stenting,
without stenting, it won't pain if you are doing DCB. And this is only for stable. Whether in NSTEM and STEMI, they are not mentioned about DCB. Only for stable they mentioned.
Gautam.
Okay, I'll get back to you about that. Okay.
Gautam, we cannot be sure whether this stable CAT they are talking post PTC or not. See, maybe it is a subset of patient who underwent PTCA previously, now has developed stable angina, has come with stable CAT.
No, Gautam, the easy thing is just see that 369 and 371 references, and it will be easier later. And Varshit, regarding to what you have told, see, the point is that like DCB is only a part of European guidelines, like because there is no drug-eluting balloon till recently, which was approved. I mean, like paclitaxel and sirolimus balloons are. Paclitaxel balloons are not approved in America. AHA doesn't approve of it. So even till recently, guidelines for AHA ACC say that for an ISR, the treatment is DES only. There is no mention of DCB also. Only now there have been a lot of trials on Magic Touch, because they endorse this thing. Basically, they endorse what is this sirolimus nano-elute technology based. The Concept Medical's Magic Touch balloon is what is accepted in Europe and in America, and that is the only thing which is FDA approved. So that is why what I meant to say is in 2018 when they came up with the guidelines for revascularization, there were two major studies which were not there. One was actually the meta-analysis which has come in 2019. It's called as actually a DDLS study. They have basically done a meta-analysis of all 10 major randomized control trials which compared between DCB and what is this drug-eluting stent in different types of ISR. The meta-analysis showed that if you use it for a DES ISR, like a drug-eluting stent which has gone into ISR, the outcomes are not as great as if you use it for a BMS ISR. So based on which they hypothesize that it might change, but the fact is that currently there is no data, class 1A kind of a data like they have mentioned for a DES ISR. When this was actually pulled up and discussed at length in India Live, if you remember. Were you there? It was discussed basically that Scheller guy had come. He is the one who has actually come up with all these concepts. He was the first one in 2006 to use also. So that they asked him the same thing that in DES. So the main thing is that neoatherosclerosis. Basically, neoatherosclerosis is a concept which is more common in DES ISR than actually BMS ISR. So neoatherosclerosis has to be treated with a stent rather than a DCB alone is basically where the mechanism is a little different.
So you are this one, this Magic Touch. Okay, this is from Gujarat, but is it so that the technology is also Indian or?
No, technology is
Gujarat ka hai bhai.
No, technology, the development of that molecule.
No. That is basically that is a Magic Touch is basically Concept Medicals. That was there in Gujarat, but then basic formulary everything is in US. That's a nano-LEO technology.
That's
so what? See, the thing is, sirolimus has been there in stents for a long time, but they were not using it because it is not lipophilic. It doesn't go and for the time you inflate, it doesn't go and sit properly. See, in fact, if you see even for paclitaxel DCB, the inflation time is only 30 seconds, but for Magic Touch, it is 60 seconds. So if you're using it in a setting where you cannot tolerate, and you cannot inflate, it's not advisable. So you have to keep it inflated for the company recommended time. So you like say if you're using in a patient with a very high burden ischemia, it will be very difficult. So 60 seconds is the Magic Touch's time actually. And they are doing, I think if I'm not wrong, Transform 1 and 2. Those are the trials which are actually comparing Magic Touch against this thing, sirolimus, against paclitaxel balloon. They're doing one-on-one study, head-on-head study. Gautam, I'll get back to you about this. So what is this?
This is mostly restenosis on the DINCO, that is.
Yeah. No, because you see debut trial basically.
I don't know.
Why I was sure was in debut trial basically looked at in de novo patients with high bleeding risk, how much what are the two strategies which can be used? One is BMS. You give it. So BMS is one of currently off-label indication for BMS is actually this thing. Very high risk patients or some surgeries to be done. Soon. Then you can use a BMS and then you stop the DAPT before 6 months is over itself. So those kind of indications, they have actually looked at whether DCB alone can do without any metal scaffolding, and they found that DCB was superior in that trial. In that trial, they have basically stopped at 4 weeks only. 1 month was the criteria, and there they have given it in the rationale for the trial that in when there is no scaffolding at all, and if you're using DCB, when there was no this kind of post lesion preparation, if there has been no dissection or TIMI flow was good, and you have used only DCB and come out, you can stop after DAPT of 4 weeks.
Okay.
Dimpu, you are telling 4 users of this DEB, no? One is ISR, small vessel disease. Third one is high risk bleed. Fourth one is
de novo CAD.
Okay, fine.
Any de novo CAD. This peptide enstemming.
High risk bleeding.
Yeah. It was third.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Dimpu, this thing, like Gautam had mentioned that in DCB they have used paclitaxel over sirolimus because it is cytotoxic, irreversible, lipophilic.
Yeah, it is less lipophilic basically.
All those points.
Yeah.
Yes, he has mentioned more lipophilic, I think.
Hey, it is less lipophilic.
Hello?
The paclitaxel is more lipophilic. So sirolimus is less lipophilic, which is why which is why with this magic touch, no, they use a phospholipid carrier to increase its lipophilicity.
Okay. No, my doubt was basically that how come the same thing does not apply for this thing, drug-eluting stents?
There it is prolonged and slow release.
No, there it is on the polymer, no?
No, I didn't get you.
See, the point is, in drug-eluting stents and drug-coating balloon, if you see the concentration of the drug, no, it is actually around 10 times more in a DCB, drug-coated balloon, than in a DES. And in a drug-eluting stent, what they do is on the polymer can be durable or biodegradable. Like if you have a PLLA and all the biovascular scaffolds are all biodegradable polymers. So, or like cobalt, chromium, all these are all actually durable polymers which will stay on. So on those, you impregnate the drug in a drug-eluting stent. So that will stay there and it will keep eluting the drug as long as it is there. So depending on which type of drug and which type of stent, it will take that long. Like, you know, recently they have come with a like Onyx 1 trial where they showed that in 1 month itself it has eluted the whole drug, like Onyx study. So that kind of thing, and after that it biodegrades itself. So those kind of things are recent. But on a standard basis, it will take around 6 to 12 months for it to elute the complete drug-eluting stent. But the drug-coating balloon works on the principle that the native endothelium which is there, or even the neoentima which is there, has to take the drug for the period of contact time. So for that, the prerequisites are that it has to be very lipophilic because it has to go through the phospholipid membrane of the intima. So it has to be very lipophilic, and paclitaxel is very lipophilic and stable. That is why it will get deposited faster than sirolimus. So because sirolimus is a better anti-proliferative agent than paclitaxel, they found a way of actually delivering that in a good way, which is the magic touch balloon, which uses sirolimus, which is actually trapped in phospholipid molecules. That is called as nano-elute technology. So, but then nevertheless, despite all that, they have to still inflate it for a longer period of time because of the inherent reduced lipophilicity of sirolimus.
And because of that nanotechnology, I think the drug will stay in the endothelium, no? After like we have inflated and removed.
Yeah, it will stay. That's what it will stay there, and it will slowly get endothelial. It will go into the this thing. It will go into the muscle media and then go into SMC. Go into adventitia soon. And one more thing important is that basically, though the dose is actually 3 micrograms per mm square here, like only the 10% of this dose actually reaches when you go and inflate.
Yeah.
So like half of, like 10%, they say these numbers usually, like, you know, I'm not sure if it is important, but 10% of the dose is washed off when you're even entering the balloon into the sheath. And then while you are coursing it from the femoral artery all the way to the coronary, 70 to 80% of the drug is washed off. And after the inflation, only 10% gets delivered of what is actually company coated on the drug. So which is why they say from the time of entry into the sheath to the to the DEB inflation in the coronary arteries, you have to keep it as less time as possible, because the longer you wait, the less effective the DCB is going to be.
Dimpu, that 4 uses you told, no? You told de novo lesions 2, you told, no? For vessels less than 3 mm and another one for...
No, less than... No. Small vessel disease is a separate thing, though it is de novo. It is de novo, small vessel disease, high bleeding risk group, and ISR. Four.
Which is the fourth one?
ISR, man.
ISR, de novo, small vessel, then bleeding risk.
No. Small vessel bearer.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know.
Okay, we'll go to the next topic then. This presentation, Gautam, there was a presentation in India Live. You remember that that guy talk. His presentation was very good actually, but it's not there in India Live site actually.
Gautam, stop Mariappa.
You remember that? Were you there in that class? I mean, were you there in that hall?
Mostly, I was not
He
there.
showed mostly angiograms, no? Post procedure, pre procedure.
Deb, no, I think it was in that one of the seconds, hall B or something, and he was talking about he's a guy who was actually one of the main persons in this thing.
Okay.
Then this thing in more than 3 mm vessel also it has been tried, no? Depth.
Yeah, that's what I told. No, this Pepcad NSTEMI is all comers trial, wherein everybody who came with NSTEMI, they have tried in DCB versus BMS versus DES in 1:1:1 randomized control trial, large one.
Okay. This thing, which topic do you want me to speak first, about colchicine or scimitar?
No, colchicine you say.
Okay. So, on colchicine, basically, first I will just mention few points from Dimpu's presentation on role of inflammation in atherosclerosis. So, we all know that he had mentioned that during the initiation and progression of atherosclerosis, there is a significant role of inflammation in the form of leukocyte recruitment and retention. And there he had also mentioned about the canakinumab and the CANTOS trial and the role of residual inflammation and the role of the statins in this reducing this residual inflammation. So from there only, I think we should pick up. And this colchicine also stems from that concept only about the inflammation, role of inflammation in atherosclerosis. And another thing is that this thing, because they have tried many other agents, so they thought that colchicine being a potent anti-inflammatory agent also, it might work. This screen is visible. Font is okay, na?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes. Continue.
Okay. So we all know colchicine is an anti-inflammatory agent which is well known, used for gout, familial Mediterranean fever, and Behçet's disease. So how the concept of colchicine came into cardiovascular disease is, as I told, role of inflammation. And another important thing that they had seen was that patients who were prescribed colchicine for indication for gout, in those patients, surprisingly, on follow-up, they found that the incidence of MI was less. So then they started speculating that maybe colchicine has something to do with the pathogenesis of MI and CAD. So that is why the concept came into existence. So first we'll briefly see how colchicine acts. So as we all know, it is a microtubule inhibitor. So colchicine gets concentrated in the leukocytes and inhibits the process of microtubule self-assembly by binding the B-tubulin. So after we administer the colchicine gets concentrated into the endothelial cells, the neutrophils and the macrophages. This cholesterol crystals I will discuss in the next page. You just focus here that this agent, colchicine, acts on the microtubular cytoskeleton. This is a macrophage. And inside the macrophage, after the inhibition of the microtubule assembly, it leads to the inhibition of this NLRP3 inflammasome. It is basically an inflammasome which has a important role in activation of interleukin-1 to its active form, that is interleukin-1 beta. So the role of inflammation in atherosclerosis or per se gout, this interleukin-1 beta activated form is very important. So if this activated form is not available, then this inflammation won't proceed. And that is where the colchicine is important, that it, by inhibiting the microtubule assembly, it inhibits the formation of this NLRP3 and thereby the activation of interleukin-1. And so how does this colchicine act, and what is the concept of these cholesterol crystals? So as we all know that atherosclerosis is basically a dynamic process where the LDL particles get accumulated in the intima, and then subsequently they lead to atherosclerosis. So they say that initially they form the CC is for cholesterol crystals. So they form microcholesterol crystals, and eventually these microcholesterol crystals, they accumulate and form the macrocrystals. And this macrocrystals is basically, they are the same concept or pathophysiology which they say in gout, the concept of crystallopathy, they have started proposing in atherosclerosis. So these macrocholesterol crystals, they damage the endothelium, and this is one of the ways where the endothelial disruption leads to increased inflammation, and the endothelial disruption will lead to the expression of this selectins, E-selectin, and other leukocyte recruitment molecules and chemokines, which will lead to recruitment of the leukocytes, and thereby the leukocytes will come into the intima and will further proliferate and enhance the inflammatory process. So the colchicine, it has multimodality action. This whole figure you don't need to read. The important things which we need to read here are, the first point where it is acting is the same, that is the M1, that is macrophage. So it is acting at the level of macrophage and leading to inhibition of NLRP3, and interleukin 1 beta is not getting formed. And this interleukin 1 beta, as I told, is the key molecule for the progression of inflammation in atherosclerosis. So the selectin expression and all those further inflammatory cascade will be inhibited. The second point is that it reduces the endothelial expression of selectins. So this pathway where the endothelium is expressing more and more selectins after getting disrupted is also being inhibited by colchicine. The third point is it inhibits the actions of circulating leukocytes by suppressing their ability to release the matrix metalloproteinase and superoxide enzymes. So it is very clear that the leukocytes, the way by which they lead to progression is also being inhibited. The fourth important thing is it impairs the platelet and leukocyte interactions. Thereby, the formation of progression of plaques will be reduced, and more importantly, the atherothrombosis, the concept of atherothrombosis, which is more important in case of ACS. The next important thing is by stimulating the expression of interleukin 10 and TGF-beta. So we all know, when Dimpu mentioned that interleukin 10 and TGF-beta are mediated through type 2 macrophages and the type 2 helper cells, and they lead to stabilization of the plaque and healing of the plaque. So the colchicine, it stimulates the expression of interleukin 10 and TGF-beta, thereby leading to stabilization. And sixth and final important thing, it limits the growth of smooth muscle cells, fibroblasts, and osteophytes. So this also will, this cascade also, because this will further lead to calcification and more damage to the endothelium. So this pathway is also inhibited by the colchicine. So we can see here that colchicine acts by multiple ways, and it is a widespread, it has a widespread anti-inflammatory activity. So they went on to propose that colchicine may actually be a better anti-inflammatory mediator than the other molecules which we have been studying till now. Like in the CANTOS trial, the canakinumab is a selective interleukin 1 beta inhibitor. But as we can see from this whole cascade, that alone inhibition of interleukin 1 beta won't be enough. There are many other pathways through which the atherosclerosis can progress. And the colchicine is acting on all these pathways. So extending the topic slightly, I thought that we can just discuss briefly about other anti-inflammatory agents. Half of it was covered by Dimpu. So as he had said initially that statins in the form of suppressing the residual inflammation, the evidence was Jupiter, PROVE-IT and IMPROVE-IT trial, where they found that patients who had achieved their target LDL cholesterol levels, in those who had HSCRP levels of more than 2, the statins lead to further suppression of inflammation, bring the levels down to less than 2 and are associated with reduced MACE. The canakinumab, as I discussed already, CANTOS trial was associated with 0.6% absolute reduction. Then there was a negative trial with methotrexate. This one is also important for us to remember. That is the CIRT trial. it showed that there was no difference in the CV events. And one more important thing, in CANTOS trial, although there was a combined primary endpoint benefit of CV, that MI and stroke, but individually mortality benefit was not there. Then there was an experimental molecule called as pexelizumab, which is a C5 inhibitor. And that pexelizumab also did not show any difference in the clinical outcomes in the APEX-AMI trial. And then there were the inhibitors of lipoprotein phospholipase A2, that is beresflutinib and daraplatinib. So these also in their respective trials did not find any benefit. So overall, the summary of these anti-inflammatory agents is, till now we did not have enough evidence for suppression of inflammation to reduce the MACE in addition or in over and above the statins. Obviously, statins are having clear-cut advantages, but above that, is there any role of preventing the inflammation? So this colchicine is a very old molecule. It is that of late the Colcott trial had come and we all were surprised with the results. But colchicine has been tried from a very long time in multiple trials. And as I told, because it has a multiple steps mechanism of action, so it has a significant role in the prevention and progression of atherosclerosis and stabilization of plaques. So there are 4 major indications of colchicine. First is pericarditis and post-pericardiotomy syndrome. Next is stable CAD. After that, ACS. And the last is post-operative AF. So we will deal with every indication one by one. The first is colchicine in pericarditis and the post-pericardiotomy syndrome. So post-pericardiotomy syndrome, I think all of us know that in the immediate post-operative period, in the near post-operative period, patient starts developing fever, fatigue, myalgias. There will be some minimal effusion, or it can sometimes also lead to tamponade. So here we can understand that colchicine is basically an anti-inflammatory, and even in a subset of spontaneous pericarditis, by suppressing the inflammation, colchicine will have a significant role. And this they have evaluated in multiple trials. There have been many trials of colchicine with pericarditis. I have tried to make it simple. The first trials were COPE. So all the trials of colchicine, they start with CO, one thing. Then after that, PE. PE means pericarditis. So when the first episode of pericarditis, the trials were COPE. Then when there was recurrent pericarditis, so they changed the COPE to CORE, RE, recurrent pericarditis. And then when there was multiple recurrences, they made it 2. So CORP2. So I thought it may be slightly easy for us to remember this way. So COPE, CORE and CORP2 are the 3 important things which we can remember. And in the post-pericardiotomy syndrome, PPS. So COPPS, COPS, COPS1 and COPS2. So this is how we can remember. And all of these trials, they in general showed that colchicine has almost a 50% reduction in the incidence of primary pericarditis, the suppression of duration of the inflammation, and even of the recurrent pericarditis. So after that, the ESC made a recommendation for use of colchicine in pericarditis and post-pericardiotomy syndrome. The standard dose was 0.5 to 1 milligrams per day. Here I would like to mention that most of the cardiovascular indications where colchicine has been tried, almost all of the indications, either they use 0.5 milligrams per day of colchicine or 0.5 to 1 milligram per day. The important thing is colchicine has a significant side effect of diarrhea, and that increases when you increase the dose of more than 1 milligrams per day. And this diarrhea is although partially dose dependent, but they have also found that even patients who have had the lowest dose of 0.5 milligrams per day, in those also there was a significant incidence of diarrhea. So what ESC says that you try to minimize the dose as far as possible and keep the lowest dose possible. So in a patient who is less than 70 kg, they recommend giving 0.5 mg per day only, because above that they found that there is significant intractable diarrhea. And the duration in case of pericarditis, they say is 3 to 6 months depending upon clinical response. And you can go for longer periods for severe recurrent pericarditis. Important thing is it does not have an indication as a monotherapy. It fails there. It is always recommended with NSAIDs or steroids. and it does not prevent or halt the progression of chronic constrictive pericarditis. So it has a role in pericarditis and recurrent pericarditis, but CCP may it does not play any significant role. Moving on to the next indication, colchicine.
Gaurav, you are telling that okay, that is that I agree that CCP it may not have a role, but what you are telling is despite preventing recurrent episodes, progression to CCP it doesn't prevent.
No.
Okay.
Basically, what they say is it might limit the duration of inflammation, duration of the pericarditis, or the magnitude of the effusion, but the subsequent long-term development of CCP, it does not have any clear-cut evidence of prevention.
Okay.
So next indication is colchicine in stable cat. So as we discussed, because of the multimodality action, multiple studies were done on the role of colchicine for secondary prevention in atherosclerosis. And one important trial which we need to remember is LODOCO. It is easy to remember, low dose colchicine, LODOCO, 0.5 milligrams per day. So it was done in stable cat patients who were diagnosed with stable cat, and it was found that colchicine reduces the MACEs over and above that of placebo. Like these patients are already on standard therapy for stable cat, and then 1:1 randomization was done with placebo versus colchicine, and colchicine was found to reduce the MACE. The most important thing which it reduced was the occurrence of ACS. But the important thing is that this trial was hypothesis generating, and to establish the further role, and that is why they are doing the LODOCO 2 trial, which is ongoing. Okay. So there was a meta-analysis, and there are many other named scientists named studies on colchicine. We don't need to remember, but there are two most important meta-analysis. One was by Hemkens et al., who included 39 studies of colchicine, and he found that colchicine does not have any mortality benefit, and it is associated with some mild reduction in MI in patients on stable cat or in patients of ACS who are now being treated with colchicine. But overall, there is not much of a prevention, further secondary prevention role with colchicine, is what the conclusion was by Hemkens. Then there was the second meta-analysis by Subodh Verma. He included 1,300 patients. He included these trials from these 5 scientists. The important thing is that this Nidorf guy has done a lot of research on colchicine, and his study was including more than 500 patients, and they were all stable cat, and the total meta-analysis was 1,300 patients. So basically this meta-analysis predominantly was driven by this Nidorf study, and what they found was, apart from this Nidorf's trial, all other trials did not have any significant outcome benefits with colchicine, except this one, O'Keefe, which evaluated only death. But the problem with O'Keefe's study was the number of events were very less. You can see the number of events, that is, death was only 2. So the significance, the statistical significance to this number can't be given. So that is why the meta-analysis of these 5 trials, what did it show? This meta-analysis included patients with stable CAD, post-ACS, post-PTCA, even stable heart failure patients. And the summary was, as the Hemkens study, that there was no mortality difference, but colchicine does lead to CV outcome reduction in the form of composite of death, MI, and stroke by almost 60%. But as I said, this was totally driven by Nidorf study. Okay, so what did Nidorf propose is that how does colchicine help? He said that colchicine leads to plaque stabilization and thereby reduction of ACS and cerebrovascular events. And another thing is, what he said is that colchicine has more role in stable cat, as the pathology is atheroma progression there. And we have seen already that how colchicine prevents the atheroma progression. So he said that because of the predominant role in atheroma progression prevention, colchicine is showing effectiveness in the stable cat patients, whereas it is very less effective in ACS patients because the role in the atherothrombosis was not very significant. The mechanism of action of colchicine did not have much role in the prevention of atherothrombosis. But this was later challenged by Vaidya. So eventually in stable cat, the conclusion is that we need more evidence with colchicine, and thereby there is no current recommendation whether to use it or not. So colchicine in ACS. In colchicine in ACS, we have to remember this Vaidya. He has done a lot of work, and he said that colchicine is also beneficial in ACS as it prevents the endothelial disruption. As I had shown, the first mechanism, how the cholesterol crystals damage the endothelium, is prevented by the colchicine, and thereby it prevents atherothrombosis. Another thing is that what Vaidya showed is that he did a CT-based study. Coronary, he did like 500 or 600 patients, and what he found that on the CT coronary angiogram, he measured the total plaque burden in patients on colchicine and without colchicine. And what he found that colchicine was not associated with any reduction in the total plaque burden. But what important thing he found was that it does reduce the fraction of the low attenuation plaque. That is, it reduces the fraction of vulnerable plaques. So that is the more important thing for us rather than the total plaque burden. So this Vaidya said that because the vulnerable plaque burden is reduced by colchicine, the colchicine has significant role in prevention of ACS also. Another thing that he found in his study was that colchicine also reduces the neointimal hyperplasia. Sorry. Then this guy, Defterios. Even if you don't remember this name, that is okay. What you can remember is that Defterios also did a study in post-ACS patients and found that colchicine reduces the infarct size. And it was quite a significant number. So subsequently, with these things in mind, many trials on role of colchicine in ACS are ongoing. And this Colcott trial was published last year, where what they did was within 30 days post-ACS, they, in addition to the standard therapy, they gave colchicine 0.5 milligram per day versus placebo. And they found that it was associated with significant reduction in the ischemic endpoints of MI, CV death, resuscitated cardiac arrest, stroke, and urgent revascularization. Okay. So thereby, this Colcott trial shows that colchicine is definitely having some role in the ACS patients. It was a follow-up of around 22 months. Okay. The ongoing trials in stable CAD and ACS, the important things only I have.
Gaurav, Colcott was a positive trial, but it was mainly driven by reduction in stroke. There was no reduction in ACS or cardiovascular death.
Yes, so yes. There was no mortality benefit. There was no mortality benefit. Only
yeah. So among all the five, it reduced.
Only these two things were
stroke. So
stroke and to some extent this urgent revascularization.
Yeah. So it's not to be interpreted as it reduces cardiovascular events, death or MI.
Exactly. None of the trials have actually shown that colchicine has any mortality benefit. Even the meta-analysis also. So that is why they are still not sure about the role and what will be the clinical benefit, and that is why they are waiting for the results of this LODOCO-2 co-ACS and this clear synergy trial. So clear synergy is a 2x2 multifactorial design trial where spironolactone and this thing colchicine both are being studied. So we can just remember these three. There are many other co-PET and all those, but I don't think that are very useful for us. So the last indication is colchicine in post-CABG and post-operative AF patients. So post-op AF, the mechanism of the occurrence of AF is being said as that because of the inflammatory milieu, this leads to heterogeneity and induces the AF. So thereby the concept of using colchicine, and in COPS, POF, again CO, PPS, post-pericardiotomy, POF, post-operative AF. So we can easily remember these trials, COPS, POF. Colchicine was found to be associated with decreased incidence and duration of the post-operative AF, whereas COPS-2 was associated with no difference. And there are many other small studies by multiple authors the conclusion of all these multiple meta-analysis is that there is a strong evidence for the use of colchicine in atrial fibrillation after CABG, although less so after pulmonary vein isolation. Even after catheter ablation of the pulmonary vein, post-procedure AF also, they found that colchicine has some role, but in this subset, the degree of benefit was not very clear. So they have made the statement that definitely post-CABG or any other major cardiac surgery, colchicine definitely has a significant role in prevention of post-operative AF, but not so significant role in the patients who develop AF after pulmonary vein isolation. And a major trial is ongoing, that is the COP-AF trial. I did not go into too much details of these things because already it is like a 10 marks answer, and I was like, okay, there is not many other things to be written. So the thing which we need to remember is the safe dose is 0.5 to 1 milligrams per day. Major issue is diarrhea. Other minor side effects, rash, alopecia, pleuritis. Important unresolved issue is the duration of colchicine. So the duration of colchicine, they say that long-term use may be associated with myelosuppression, but there was Nidorf et al. And the meta-analysis by Subodh Verma, what they found that even with the long-term use, the incidence of myelosuppression was not statistically different compared to the placebo arm. But because myelosuppression is one of the conventional side effects of colchicine therapy, we can't neglect this. And that is why they say that with long duration of therapy, we are not yet clear that how long can we use colchicine. So thereby the conclusion of the discussion is that for pericarditis and post-operative AF, you can prescribe colchicine for 3 to 6 months. After that, for long duration of therapy, we are not sure, particularly in the stable CAD and the ACS subset. This topic is a step. Anything anyone wants to add?
For pericarditis, Braunwald says it is 3 months. Colchicine. Colchicine, we have to give it for 3 months for pericarditis. If you
3 to 6 months. I took it from ESC Dimpu. Actually,
ESC says... ESC is talking about basically the MACE prevention, this thing, basically. When you say the duration is unknown. For pericarditis...
I am talking... this thing. For pericarditis also, I have mentioned 3 to 6 months.
Correct. Yeah.
So for pericarditis, as you said, it is 3 to 6 months only.
This steroids in pericarditis, we need to remember that basically this is only one of the few conditions in medicine. In fact, higher dose of steroids has had more recurrences of pericarditis for some unknown effect. So even in Braunwald, it is clearly given, and also a lot of studies on acute pericarditis have shown that low dose steroids have to be given. So it is 0.2 to 0.5 mg per kg. The upper dose of steroid for acute pericarditis, which has to be given, whether or not being given in conjunction with NSAID or colchicine, is 0.2 to 0.5 mg per kg. Even 1 mg per kg has had higher higher recurrences of pericarditis, they say. So just something to remember.
First episode of acute pericarditis also we can use colchicine, no?
Colchicine, you can use. First episode you can use. Yeah.
Yes, first episode also you can use. And important thing that I wanted to add regarding...
or is it up to our discretion?
Varshit, I can't hear you.
No, is it a class 1 recommendation or up to our discretion in first episode?
First episode has been tried in that COPE trial, I think. COPE first one. But then as of now, it is not given in that. It does. I'm not sure. It comes in thoracic guidelines, I think, but I'm not sure actually if it is class 1.
See, whether it is class 1, 2A, 2B, Varshit, that is not clearly given in the ESC recommendation, because that is a supplementary web addenda. Okay. So there they have not given separate classes of recommendation, but they have clearly written that colchicine is not to be used as monotherapy. It has to be added in patients with NSAIDs or steroids and can be used for first episode of pericarditis also. But what is the class of recommendation? I am not sure because they didn't mention it.
And this NSAIDs when we use in acute pericarditis, that also like after symptom resolution, we have to continue for 6 weeks. It's like that.
No. It is only NSAIDs and steroids and is for 2 weeks only. It is rapid taper of 2 weeks. Only colchicine is given for 3 to 6 months.
Yes. No, this one, even though once the symptoms resolve, in case of this one, acute pericarditis,
we should give it for 3 to 6 months.
No. Because I'm talking of NSAID.
No. See, the thing is, only colchicine has been proven to reduce the recurrences alongside if it is used even steroids also a little bit. So NSAIDs do not have any role for recurrence. So which is why as soon as the symptoms go off, you will actually stop the NSAIDs at 1 to 2 weeks. But as opposed to this one, colchicine has a role in recurrence. So you give it for 3 to 6 months in preventing recurrence.
Okay, no, because why this question came was, I was there with KH sir and Indu when they were discussing for that pericarditis talk, and in that I think I then cross-referred Brunwald also, cross-check with Brunwald. Even they are telling NSAID has some longer duration. It's not like up to symptom limitation. So anyway,
1 to 2 weeks, I remember. After that, followed by rapid taper. I'm not sure. We'll check that.
Do these steroids reduce the incidence of CCP, sequel of developing CCP after pericarditis?
No.
See, there is no clear-cut benefit, Venki. Even Brunwald mentions that we are not sure. Like even if you give NSAID, steroids, colchicine,
logically speaking, it might because it reduces recurrence. So logically, recurrent pericarditis has been one of the definite risk factors for CCP. But usually the acute pericarditis, especially if it is idiopathic pericarditis, for which we use this colchicine and all that, no matter how many number of times you have recurrence, it going into CCP is very rare, actually. Like it's almost very rare that it going into CCP. That's what they say. Irrespective of the number of times it recurs. Gaurav, you want to ask if people want it now or because Gaurav has basically prepared something about this scimitar he wanted to share. Should we have it now or?
It will take some 10-15 minutes, a very small thing. If you are like others are interested, I will discuss otherwise.
We'll continue. It's okay.
Okay.
This one. So this one, aspirin, it's in the Brunwald only table. Aspirin, 750 to 1000 milligram every 8 hourly. Initially for 1 to 2 weeks. Then you have to taper every week for next 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay.
Then discontinue.
Okay. So it's only for a month or two. Okay, month or 1.5 months, 6 weeks.
No, even once you decrease the dose every week for 2 to 3 weeks, then discontinue. So maybe little longer also.
Okay. So we'll just briefly discuss about scimitar. This is a very small review article, and I thought that this article itself is enough. And we do not need any notes. So I have just highlighted what are the things which we need to remember, and hardly 20-25 points, not much. So the scimitar syndrome, as we all know, is the second most common type of PAPVC. When I say the second most common type of PAPVC, I have excluded the subsets of PAPVD. So the first most common type is anomalous drainage of the left pulmonary veins to the left innominate vein. And the second most common is the anomalous drainage of the right pulmonary veins to the IVC, that is scimitar. So although it is rare, but it is important for us to know, and the incidence is around 1 to 3 per 1 lakh live births. The important thing is it is it is a composition of 4 or 5 things that we need to remember. First thing is hypoplasia of the right lung. So there is actual volume loss of the right lung. Then the second thing is that the dextroposition of the heart. This is the most important point, dextroposition. The third thing, hypoplasia of the right pulmonary artery. And the fourth important thing is the anomalous systemic pulmonary arterial supply from the aorta to the right lung. I think almost all of us would have seen a case of scimitar syndrome
going for cath in our PEDS posting. So we all know that this collateral is one of the important things which we keep on doing coil closure or device closure. And this contributes to a significant amount of left to right shunt basically. So when you suspect Scimitar syndrome in a child is very important is when the child has a dextroposed or a mesoposed heart. So what do you mean by a dextroposed heart and a mesoposed? Like, what is the difference? I think you all can go through Dimpu's first X-ray presentation of Jaydeva. Okay, so basically dextroposition or mesoposition is when the cardiac mass is either in the center or to the right. The difference from dextrocardia is the base to apex axis. So the base to apex axis, if it points to the right, then it becomes dextrocardia instead of dextroposition. And if it is the base to apex axis is to the left, but the mass is to the right, then it is dextroposition. So the summation of all these things is called as the Scimitar syndrome. And we all know the Scimitar sign. I won't waste time there. So the incidence is 1 to 3 per 1 lakh live births, but the true incidence may actually be higher because it is a subset of partial anomalous pulmonary venous connection. And we all know that a significant proportion of these patients, they remain asymptomatic throughout life and they may die with that also. So thereby the incidence may actually be higher. And there are 3 types of presentation. Either the person can present incidentally with a dextroposed or mesoposed heart on the chest X-ray, or the patient can present in the adult life or in the adolescent age with symptoms of recurrent LRTI or progressive dyspnea or fatigue, or there can be an infantile group where the patient presents soon after birth, which is complicated by severe pulmonary hypertension or cardiac failure. Now, why this cardiac failure and PH occurs, I will come to that subsequently, but we need to remember that this is a very small subset. Like less than 10% of the patients present like this. Most of the patients are more often asymptomatic. So many authors have given different names to Scimitar syndrome. The important thing is that it is not only a cardiac anomaly, it is a cardiopulmonary anomaly, and it comes under the spectrum of pulmonary sequestration syndromes, also called as the Vino-Lobar syndrome. There are some 10-11 components here, but hello? Hello? Hello?
Continue.
Continue.
Okay, so basically I have highlighted the points which we definitely need to remember. One is hypoplasia of the right lung. The second is hypoplasia or agenesis of the RPA. The third important thing is the anomalous supply collateral from the aorta to the right lower lobe of the lung. And it is basically the posterobasal segment of the right lower lobe where the supply goes. And it comes from the infradiaphragmatic descending aorta as a direct branch. And the next important thing is the dextroposition. Another thing is horseshoe lung. So what is horseshoe lung is basically the lower lobes of both the lungs are connected posteriorly like a horseshoe kidney, and they loop around the esophagus and the, so thereby this is having high chances of getting compressed between the vertebra and the esophagus. And another thing is 80% of cases of this horseshoe lung are associated with Scimitar, and Scimitar also has been associated with absent pericardium. Another important thing is association with other congenital heart disease. The most common association is the ASD. So this is the, apart from ASD, VSD, PDA, COAC, all these can be associated, but even remembering ASD is enough. So as I told, one presentation can be in the neonatal period with predominant CHF or pulmonary hypertension, where the pulmonary hypertension is basically occurring because of these 5 or 6 important causes. First important cause is the large left to right shunt via the anomalous pulmonary vein. So here I would just like to give you one hypothetical example. We all know that in a case of a PAPVC, because the right atrium has a lower resistance, so the anomalous drainage starts increasing to the, the pulmonary blood flow starts going to the anomalously draining lung. So thereby, there is a larger, presuming that we are talking about the anomalous drainage of the right lung, the pulmonary blood flow increases on the right than the left. And important thing here is Scimitar mein there is volume loss of the right lung. So there is volume loss and the pulmonary vascular bed is lost. So thereby there is increased pulmonary vascular resistance. So as a regular case of PAPVC, where we expect that the right anomalous pulmonary venous drainage will lead to increased blood flow to the right lung, might not actually happen in scimitar because there is volume loss of the lung. So even with that, there may be a significant amount of blood going to the left lung rather than the right lung. So we cannot compute it equally with a simple PAPVC. Although if the lung volume loss is less, then there will be a large left to right shunt which will contribute to the pH. Second thing is the collateral. It is coming directly from the aorta. So the pressure transmission will be direct and thereby it can lead to pH. Then next thing is the right lung hypoplasia, the volume loss. Then this pulmonary vein which is draining anomalously can get stenosed or obstructed, thereby leading to post-capillary pH and subsequently reactive pH. And then association with other congenital cardiac malformations like ASD, VSD, PDA, LVOT obstructions, all those things will contribute to pH, and then the newborn can have a PPHN. So all these things will contribute to the pH, and thereby scimitar syndrome, although usually not associated with cyanosis, can present with cyanosis in patients with this kind of pathophysiology, particularly when the presence of ASD, VSD, PDA, which will be allowing the right to left shunt easily. So in these subsets where the pH is predominant, definitely because of the volume and pressure overload of the right heart is going to fail. And these children are to be taken up for early surgical intervention. The previously what they used to do was they used to do the lobectomy or the sequestered lobe they removed. But what they found was that was not the answer. And this leads to significant loss of lung volumes. And thereby, when I discuss the treatment part, they came up with the newer modalities. The other thing is the adult or the adolescent presentation, where they can present with recurrent LRTI, particularly of the right lower lobe, because that is the sequestered lobe, which is getting the more blood supply from the aorta. So these patients, they may be totally asymptomatic, or they may present with progressive fatigue, dyspnea, or recurrent LRTI, or it may be just an incidental finding. So physical examination, nothing. You can write the same findings as ASD or a PAPVC. Important thing is the cardiac impulse and the other sounds are on the right, and these patients will have a systolic murmur. This systolic murmur can be a flow murmur, or it can be a collateral murmur from the aorta. Here again, it can be a continuous murmur or a systolic murmur, because most of the times there will be some resistance of the tube, that is the collateral, and there will be some intrinsic stenosis in the collateral. Thereby, the continuous nature of the murmur is sometimes lost. So how do you suspect a case has come to you? How do you suspect scimitar? So definitely the most important thing I told is the X-ray. Whenever you see an infant with a dextroposed or a mesoposed heart, scimitar should be one thing that should come to your mind. Other DDs for a dextroposed or mesoposed heart is CCTGA. Then TOF patients also we see that the heart is mesoposed. Then it can be a normal variation, or it can be associated with heterotaxy syndromes. Here I had one doubt, if Lokesh, Dimpu, Motika meet anyone, what are the other DDs for this dextroposition or mesoposition? Like, is there anything else? Hello?
As in differentials for
dextroposed or a mesoposed heart.
This heterotaxy syndromes will be different.
Yeah. Heterotaxy, CCTGA, normal variation, TOF, and scimitar I told. Apart from this, is there anything else?
Apart from this, it might be non-cardiac, like right low lobe.
No. Apart from the lung issues, like lung collapse and all those things are okay.
Okay, like that. Not sure. I think that will sum it up. Why? I mean, why did you ask specifically? Like in case we are asked in the exam.
Because they ask in exam. That is why I asked.
Yeah, like X-ray for scimitar is was also kept as one of the spotters. Like in that they accepted CCTGA as a differential. CCTGA and sometimes in TOF also you can get. That's all.
Okay. Because I asked Soumya ma'am also, she didn't reply.
Gauti, hello.
Hello. Recent pediatrics people.
Gautam, why is still in pediatrics only? He should tell Gautam why our actual pediatrician Venkatesh should speak.
Venki.
What you need, man? I don't know.
No. Okay.
Okay. Okay. So the another important thing that apart from this scimitar vein being called as the because of the scimitar Turkish short, the other name for this appearance is the woman's leg appearance. So the dextro position is the most important thing, and there will be varying degrees of opacity of the right hemithorax, which will lead to compensatory hyperinflation of the right upper lobe or the sorry.
ಅದು ಹೇಗೆ ಅಪ್ಪ ವುಮೆನ್ಸ್ ಮೆನ್ಸ್ ಲೆಗ್ ಯಾಕೆ ಆಗ್ಬಾರ್ದು?
ನೀವೇ ಹೇಳಿ ಯಾಕಂತ.
They gave some figure. No, figure 1 is saying that same one. Okay.
This one.
Avalugu women leg up idu hingide. Okay.
Gautam, you can write to the authors.
ಎಲ್ಲಿಯಪ್ಪ ಲೆಗ್ ಕಾಣಿಸ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಲ್ಲಿ.
Okay, so there can be compensatory hypertrophy of the contralateral lung also. Sorry, hypertrophy, compensatory hyperinflation. So important thing is the scimitar sign is absent in infants because like the supracardiac TAP, you see the snow, what is that? Figure of 8 appearance. The same thing, it requires some time for the anomalous vein to grow. Thereby in the infants, we don't find this sign. Subsequently in children and adults it is obvious. So next, once you have seen a dextroposed heart and you are suspecting scimitar, what all are the basic signs you will start in echocardiography? The first most important sign is you will see a disparity in the caliber of the right and the left pulmonary arteries. Because the right pulmonary artery is hypoplastic, it will be smaller. Then the next thing what you will see is the anomalous drainage into the IVC, which in the subcostal view, we can see that there will be an anomalous red flow into the IVC coming. And then we can trace the collateral also. And sometimes we can find the this thing, associated lesions also can be delineated. So, but the most important thing is the dextro position with the small caliber RP and the flow into the IVC. Apart from that, other defects and the collaterals you always look for. And the important thing is there can be a confluence behind the right atrium of the, and then from there the vertical vein, basically the right middle and the lower pulmonary veins will form a confluence behind the right atrium, and from there the vein will descend, the scimitar vein will descend, and that is called as fir tree appearance, fir tree. Okay. So now we all know that the pulmonary vein Doppler, if we see, it is multiphasic. Like there is a systolic flow, then in the systole there are 1 or 2 peaks, then there is a diastolic flow, then there is some small reversal like this. Okay, so it is multiphasic. Whereas in a scimitar vein, it is always a monophasic flow. The pattern in scimitar vein is monophasic, extending throughout the cardiac cycle with no reverse flow at the atrial contraction. This is one important thing that we need to remember. Now, CT, MRI, obviously they will delineate the anatomy. MRI pay, we can also get the shunts, what is the volume and everything. Apart from that, the horseshoe lung demonstration will also be easy on this CT and MRI. So important is the oximetry. As I told that because there is volume loss of the right lung, the amount of blood which will be going to the right lung may actually be reduced. Okay, so when if you think that there will be a step up in the RA because of the partial anomalous pulmonary venous connection, that may not be true actually, because the volume, the amount of blood which is going to the right lung, which will be less, and the left lung will be more. So overall, the step up which we are expecting may not be that much because of the left to right shunt. And another thing is, if there are, as I told, if there is significant pH, they can actually have cyanosis. There may be some desaturation. Another thing is the IVC blood is actually having higher saturations compared to the SVC. So that will also confound the results. So oximetry is not very reliable in case of a scimitar syndrome, is what they say. but definitely you can have step up in the IVC and RA saturations. And important thing is the delineation of the anatomy of the scimitar vein will be very easy in the cath when you do the angiogram. And
atrial level step up will be lesser, you told, no?
Yes. Like it may not be essential that you will always find a step up. You may find or you may not find, depending upon the volume loss of the lung, whether it is there or not.
Hey, one more thing, in scimitar, right lower alone is affected, or right lower pulmonary vein?
No, it is not essential. It can be.
Or both can be.
It can be that the entire right lung can drain into the IVC. It can be that the right middle and lower can drain, or it can be only the lower. Okay.
Any of those can happen. Okay.
It can be any combination. So, in fact, they have also documented cases of left scimitar, where the whole left lung was coming contralateral side and was draining into the IVC. But this is very rare. Oxygen, okay. And then you want to evaluate the PA pressures. For management, the PA pressure assessment is very important. And then you can delineate what is the degree of hypoplasia of the RPA. And the collaterals also can be delineated, where if you are going for definitive management, you will do device closure of the collateral. So as I told, there are many other names, HALAS, mirror image lung syndrome. Why mirror image? Because the right lower lobe of the lung is lost. So similar to the lingula on the left side, they are saying mirror image lung syndrome and many other names. It is more common in females is what we need to remember. So as I told, most of the patients are asymptomatic and 70% of the patients have dextroposed heart. That is what we need to remember. And
dextroposition and dextroversion both are same, no?
What?
Dextroposition, dextroversion.
Yeah, but dextrocardia is not the same.
Different. That is different.
Dextroversion is different. Dextroposition is different. Dextroversion is different.
What is the difference?
Dextroversion is used for isolated ventricular inversion with a side this thing, but dextroposition is actually there are two schools of thought, but most accepted is this, that dextroposition is only mediastinal shift, like what
dextroposition is only mediastinal shift, no?
Yeah, but
dextroversion also I remember as saying.
No, dextroversion is ventricles inversion. Ventricles are inverted.
This thing, L-looping.
Yeah, that's what L-looping. But the point is that it won't. This thing is the atrioventricular concordance is lost, actually.
Okay, so isolated ventricular inversion, you mean?
Yeah, but some people use dextroversion and dextroposition interchangeably. But I've actually read on this. When I had presented that, it said that it should not. That kind of use should be discouraged. But as of now, dextroversion, radiologically at least, in radiopedia it's given actually, saying that dextroversion is isolated ventricular inversion.
Then in scimitar it is dextroposition, no?
In dextroposition.
Dextroposition. Okay, so the amount of shunt may be less than 50%, as I was mentioning, or in some cases it may be more. So most of the patients are asymptomatic and they have normal or only mild elevation of PA pressures, but subset where I mentioned the other causes of pH, they can present early and can develop pH. In the long run, patients who develop pH and patients who are operated late with pH, they will have residual pH, they will have arrhythmias like AF, they can have stroke and cardiac failure because of the pH. So the important thing is, what are the indications for surgical repair? So the presence of the scimitar syndrome, the whole syndrome, particularly in association with ASD, pH, or the stenosis of the anomalous vein, are the three main important indications where we need to address these patients. Because a patient with a simple right lower pulmonary vein anomalously draining, like a single PAPVC, it might not cause any harm. We can leave that patient actually. But patients who have a associated ASD, which will contribute to the volume overload of the RV, patients who have pH and stenosis, these patients are the ones where we need to intervene. So initially, as I told, they used to try lobectomy and all, but it failed. Now the current consensus is that if the length of the scimitar vein is significant enough, you can transect the attachment to the IVC, transect it and reroute it and transplant it into the left atrium if this is possible. If this is not possible, then patients, if they have an ASD, what you can do through the IVC, through the ASD, you can baffle it into the left atrium. If there is no ASD, you can create a surgical ASD and baffle it into the left atrium. Is the simple approach. And the collateral can be done a device or coil closure. Ashte appa.
Nice article. Where is this article from, Gaurav?
1 second, Dimpu.
Very nice.
Some Pan-Africa something, yeah. Pan-Africa.
Pan-Africa. Okay. Send it across in the group. It's nice.
Yeah, yeah. You put, that is what I told you. It was a direct ready-made 10 marks question.
कहाँ का अफ्रीका चला जाता है भाई तू पढ़ने में, इधर रहना भाई। अफ्रीका मत चले जाना। अब कल तो बोलेगा कि ये कोई फिजी का जर्नल है, उससे कुछ लिया है।
भाई मैं तुझे केनिया भेजूंगा, रुक, तू केनिया में गाड़ी चलाना।
फिर तू बोलेगा
वर्षित नैनो टेक्नोलॉजी बनाएगा।
कल ये जाए बोलेगा अर्जेंटीना की जर्नल में से कुछ निकाला है।
चलो चलो, बहुत हो गया।
ओके, नहीं कल कौन सा है टॉपिक?
कल मैं प्रेजेंट कर रहा हूँ ना, पोस्ट एमआई रीस्ट्रेटिफिकेशन।
हाँ हाँ हाँ। एंड
वरुण है शायद सेकंड पर्सन।
Oh, Varun, where is Varun? Varun didn't come today. Okay, sure. Okay, fine.
नहीं, I think Varun was on duty, so he left.
Yeah, he left it on recording. Yeah. Varshit?
हाँ।
अबे वो जो मैजिक टच का है ना, तू भी कुछ कर बे, गुजरात जाके थोड़ा देखना हो।
अभी जाने तो दे।
अब स्कोप है उसमें, मुझे लग रहा है।
मैं इरोटिक टच दूंगा, डोंट वरी।
एरोटिक टच दूंगा बोल रहा है साला।
भाई गौतम, you find out about that men's leg and women's leg, man. Why they named it like that?
अबे वो ऊपर से वुमेन्स लेग भी नहीं लग रहा है साला। बार जैसे वो लग रहा है कुछ।
That I think that article is written by a man, not a woman.
वो कोई एरोटिक मोड में लिखा है साला, वुमेन्स लेग।
Okay, bye bye.
Bye guys, thank you.
Okay, bye.